Right, I make it 6 o'clock according to the atomic clock. Already, Councillor Sunnux is just about to arrive, so we'll begin. Here he is. Right. Evening, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee on the 28th of November. My name's Councillor Chris Pearson. I'm Councillor for the Beerchurch Ward and Chair of this meeting. I'm not expecting any practice alarms this evening, but in the event of any emergency, I would ask everyone to please evacuate the Town Hall by going down the main staircase or the back staircase to the High Street and then to the car park behind the Town Hall in Rumwald Street. The meeting is being held in the Grand Jury Room this evening and is being broadcast live over the internet on the Council's YouTube channel and will be available to look at later on should anyone wish. Please would everyone use their microphones whenever they speak. Members of the committee are encouraged to use electronic devices, but to set these to silent, not to use camera flash, not to use voice functions during the meeting. There are toilets on this floor and the floor below, should anyone need it. There's an induction loop in this room, should anyone need it. And if necessary, we'll have a short break around 8 o'clock this evening. I'm just going to take introductions, go around the room. I will go from my left because I think it's just easier to go around as everyone's seated. And I'll start with the Monitoring Officer, Head of Governance, Mr. Weavers.
Good evening, Andrew Weavers, Head of Governance and Monitoring Officer.
Good evening, I'm Richard Carr. I'm the Interim Managing Director for the Amphora Group of Companies.
Good evening, I'm Alistair Wilson. I'm the Senior Commercial Manager for Amphora Group.
Dennis Willets, Lexton and Braeswick Ward.
William Sunnux, Rural North Ward.
Carl Powell, Mersey and Pyfleet Ward.
Good evening, Chair. Councillor Dave Harris, Beerchurch Ward.
Councillor Alison J, Highwards Ward.
Chris Hartgrove, Deputy Section 151 Officer.
Andrew Small, Officer.
Matthew Evans, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you. I'm not quite sure we're getting the occasional little beep. We'll see if that continues. That's what it was. All right, fine. Just before we go on to substitutions, I just want to explain to everyone that I'm intending to take item 9 on the polling districts first, and then take everything else in the order on which it appears on the agenda. So substitutions this evening, we have Councillor Powling for Councillor Dundas, and Councillor Dundas has replaced Councillor Smithson on a permanent basis as a member of the committee. We have Councillor Willets substituting for Councillor Naylor, and unfortunately Councillor Paul Smith is unable to attend this evening, and the substitution for him is unfortunately unwell, so will be one light this evening. Urgent items, I'm not aware of any urgent items, though Councillor Willets has brought something to my attention that we will deal with under the work programme. Any declarations of interest? Item 4, anyone have? I'm not seeing any indications. So we'll move on to item 5, minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of October 2023. Can we agree that that's an accurate record, those of us who were here? Agreed? Thank you. Have your say. I have an indication of one have your say, Councillor McLean, who wishes to speak on the polling district item. And apart from that, I have no others. Thank you. Right, so that moves us on to the next item, which is the review of polling districts and polling places. Andrew Weavers is going to introduce this, and we also have James Bennett and Debbie Palmer from Electoral Services online with us as well. Thank you, Mr. Weavers.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. So this report is being brought to you this evening in relation to the requirement for each local authority to undertake periodic reviews of its polling districts and polling places for parliamentary elections, and these reviews should happen every 5 years. So accordingly, we should be commencing a review at this point in time. However, as members will be aware, we are currently in the early stages of an electoral review, which is being undertaken by the Local Government Boundary Commission. And the Commission have said to us that it would not be appropriate for us to undertake a full review whilst the electoral review is being undertaken. So consequently, the full review will happen in 2026, following the implementation of the new ward patterns and the introduction of the new council. However, we have taken the opportunity to look at the polling districts and the polling places, and as the report outlines, a consultation was undertaken on certain proposals to change a couple or so of the polling places. Now, this review was undertaken to ensure the suitability, the accessibility of each polling place, and in particular, the situation of the polling stations around ease of access and convenience to electors. In paragraph 5.7 of the report, Chairman, it sets out the proposed changes which have been consulted upon and are set out there. So, Chairman, I won't take you through those, but just to remind you that the recommended decisions are for this committee to recommend to full council that the revised schedule of polling places as set out in Appendix A and Appendix B be approved. Happy to take any questions or James's. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Weavers. I think at this point then I'll bring in Councillor McLean, or have your say.
Thank you, Chair. Just starting off, democracy is priceless, and any disruption to democracy and any disruption to day-to-day life from democracy is always worth it. But that's not to say that where disruption can be avoided, we shouldn't try and avoid it. And big disruption elections causes to schools when they're used as polling stations. I think where it can be avoided, schools shouldn't be polling stations if there's a decent option nearby. In my ward, there is one school that is a polling station. That's Hamilton Primary School. The parents there don't want it to be a polling station. The head teacher doesn't want it to be a polling station. The pupils don't want it to be a polling station. None of the Labour councillors want it to be a polling station. There are much better areas nearby. So I support any proposal to replace Hamilton Primary School as a polling station. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor McLean, and I share your remarks about disruption to children's education by using schools as polling stations. If we can avoid that wherever possible, I think that's a good move forward. And I know the council has been moving in that direction for some time now. Right, so I'll open up to members for comment and contribution. I've got an indication from Councillor Willits and then Councillor Howard.
Thank you, Chairman. One of the 4 polling stations under review in this report is in the ward that I represent, and I echo the remarks of the last speaker about not using schools. In this case, what was a polling station school has now been moved to Colchester Croquet Club. A most excellent game, I would say, Chairman, and I would encourage all councillors to take it up. It concentrates the mind no end. The Croquet Club in East Lexton is not wholly ideal, as the Electoral Services Department have pointed out. But last year, the ward councillors gave a locality budget grant to the Croquet Club to start improving. And if the leader of the council is generous enough to have locality budgets in the forthcoming year, we will be giving a further grant to ensure that as quickly as possible the Croquet Club meets the DDA requirements to make it a superb polling station. So I welcome this and the other amendments that are on the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Willett. Councillor Harris.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good evening, all. I've got a fair bit to say about this. I'll start with AB, Chair, if I may. It's in the document, Appendix A. It's called Willows, Monkwick, and for those of you noticed that Barn Hall is not part of Willows or Monkwick or AB. I'm wondering whether there's a mistake there and that Barn Hall is an error. They don't vote at Thomas Lord Audley School and never have done, and if there's any intention for them to do, I think there'll be a revolt. So I'm hoping that that's a mistake and that can be confirmed. That's the first question I've got. The second one is that, for me, it seems eminently sensible for Rainsborough polling district to vote at the C3 church, because that's very much nearer to those residents that wish to take part in democracy, and I hope they all do, for them to go to the C3 church. That would be very good. Notwithstanding that, of course, the C3 church is mentioned in there as having adequate parking. I would find that you would very much dispute that if you were to talk to the Abbey Field surgery, because there's always a dispute over car parking in that area because they share the car park. So the doctors is very busy during the day there, so that's a problem. But most of the people in Rainsborough could walk fairly easily, Rainsborough polling district to the C3 and walk back home again on a nice pleasant walk down to the polling station and back, as many do. So I would support Shrub End going there. What I can't support and won't support, and some of the residents I've been speaking to in the last few days are quite appalled by the proposal, is to move AA in Beerchurch across a busy Beerchurch road, albeit that it's got a junction and traffic lights, moving across the road, and for them to walk across and go to the C3 church as opposed to Plum Hall. First of all, Chairman, the Plum Hall is owned by Colchester City Council. It's owned by Colchester Borough Homes, Arm Length Management. Why on earth we should have to go and pay for a polling station when people are quite happy to vote at the Plum Hall? The other thing, I can give you some feedback, Chair, for those of you who have been around a bit shorter than I have. I've been around probably a tad too long. But for me, the feedback is that when AA polling district was voting in St George's Church, at St George's School in Canterbury, and you heard what Councillor McLean said about schools being shut down, they found a way to get it away from St George's, which is in Newtown, and come back to Beerchurch and vote in their own ward. The confusion, Chair, over those years that people were actually voting in St George's School on polling day was a behold that you would not want to see again. So I would urge a rethink about taking AA residents and leaving them to vote within the triangle of land that is the toppermost part of Beerchurch ward, and keep them voting in the AA area, but Plum Hall, as it were. Feedback from residents. I spoke to Michael yesterday. He is a disabled man, lives in Gurdon Road, has a walking stick. He will not want a postal vote. He likes to, because he's quite adamant about this, he likes to go down there with his walking stick and have his say and his vote. And he was very much against walking across a busy road because he thinks some of his neighbours won't want to do that either. I spoke to Trish as well, and an email and a text after that as well, Mr. Chairman, and she was opposed to it as well, and she just drives a mobility scooter and is opposed to it. And other people in the area that I could relate to you feel very offended that we're going to be making disabled people, not least of which are the residents of Nancy Smith Close, who are, after all, a residential home for elderly and infirm people. A lot of them have not got limited mobility, and in some cases their only excursion is walking across a yard in Colchester Homes property and going to the communal room to have a cup of tea on their little communal room there. And for them to be forced to walk across the road again against their will, they do not want to use their postal vote. They would rather go and vote in person because they like to feel they've done their duty and been seen to done their duty, and having a postal vote doesn't always cut the mustard for them. So I mentioned the parking. The parking is not ideal and won't be ideal because unless the Abbeyfield Doctors ever shuts down. The pharmacy there as well. So you've got the pharmaceutical centre there at Abbeyfield Surgery, the doctors, the coming and going by the C3 Church. And then on top of that, you're going to encourage people to come across from AA who, again, as I say, are infirm in cars, not the way to go. So I'm totally opposed to that. The rest of it, I think, is okay. I would finish, Mr. Chairman, by mentioning St Margaret's Church Hall in Stansted Road. It's in the notes and it's in the feedback that I gave. The disabled access, there is one round the back of St Margaret's Church, but if we can find a way to have a ramp put at the front of St Margaret's Church, which is a 60s building, we didn't think of DDA regulations in the 60s as much as we do now, do we? So I think that would be very helpful to those that have got limited mobility and wish to come along and have their say in our democracy. Thank you, Chair. Happy to come back later on if there's any debate on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. I share some of your concerns about Plum Hall, but I also think that there are some advantages of moving. The parking is limited at Plum Hall as well, and I've always been a little bit concerned about the safety of the residents of Nancy Smith Close, having a number of strangers, if you like, appearing suddenly during the day to vote. So I can see the advantages of moving, but I can also see the disadvantages of moving as well. I've also had it raised with me by Councillor Tim Young that the proposed change for the Grinstead polling station from the St John's Ambulance to the Hythe Community Centre is not to the local councillors' liking, because they feel that the footfall at Hythe Community Centre is usually much lower than it has been when it's been at St John's Ambulance. It was put to me that we might, or that the council might consider a porter cabin at Tesco's, and I'll pass this on to Mr. Weavers to respond to, as well as your remarks, Councillor Harris.
Chairman, I think you should invite James Bennett to respond. He's online and he'll be able to answer the detailed questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. James, can I ask you to come in on those couple of remarks, please?
Thank you. Good evening, all. With regards to Councillor Harris's first point, with regards to Barn Hall being mentioned alongside Monkwick, apologies, that is a mistake. As Councillor Harris rightly pointed out, it should just read Willows and Monkwick polling district. I'll move on to the final point that Councillor Harris made with regards to St Margaret's Church and the ramp. I haven't had a chance yet to visit the church following your feedback, but we'll certainly look at that, whether it's a temporary ramp or permanent ramp. But I'll be honest with you, I don't think we'll have within our remit the abilities to fund a permanent ramp, but we may have stock or be able to purchase something that can be used temporary basis on the polling station day for the front ramp, as it were. With regards to the change for Plum Hall to C3, I'd echo Councillor Pearson's comments that there's pros and cons to both sides. And that particular point that Pearson made with regards to the safety of the residents, I think that's one of my chief concerns with using Plum Hall, the common room, but also the accessibility of the room itself is, I would say, poor in terms of how the main entry point is through what is effectively a shared corridor for people's front doors into what is effectively a shared space for that residential site. The alternative door is effectively, I don't know a better way to describe it other than it's just not up to the standard to allow wheelchair access into it. So I would say it's the lesser of the two evils to go across the main road, but obviously I do appreciate Councillor Harris's concerns, both with regards to parking and obviously walking across the road, as it were. Yeah, that's all I had to say about that. Obviously happy to debate further if necessary.
Thank you. Yeah, I would echo Councillor Harris's concerns about St Margaret's Church as well in terms of disability access. That is a very busy polling station, and I know from personal experience that getting people in and out with mobility issues can be a major problem at that site, especially at busy times. So if there's anything that we can do about a ramp at the front of the church, that would be greatly appreciated. Councillor Harris, did you want to respond at all?
As far as I'm concerned, the disability for people at Plum Hall themselves going across C3 is a no-no. They just won't make it. So you're disadvantaging people or forcing them to have a postal vote against their will in this what is supposed to be a democracy. I will be voting against it if it's in there. If you're happy, I probably won't get a seconder, but I would move that this is not taken up in the way that it's described here, the C3, the AA polling district moving across to C3. I'm supportive of Rainsford because I think it makes absolute sense, but you know, two wrongs don't make a right, so I can't allow one through and not the other, so I can't support the AA move.
Thank you. Mr. Bennett, I'm not sure whether I heard any response to the suggestion around the Grinstead alternative.
With regards to the use of a porta cabin at Tesco, as far as we're concerned, from a safety point of view and from a point of view of being able to run a polling station effectively and smoothly, a porta cabin simply wouldn't be a viable option. I did explain to Councillor Tim Young that when we did use the porta cabin, that was a last resort on short notice, effectively, but it wouldn't be a viable long-term solution. Hopefully that's
Thank you.
an answer.
Thanks for that. Okay, so councillors, we're in paragraph 2 of the item. We're asked to recommend to full council that the revised schedule of polling places that's set out in Appendix A, that includes these 5 alterations, is sent to council and to delegate to the returning officer authority to approve an alternative polling place if any polling places become unavailable or found to be unsuitable in the run-up to an election. Those in favour? And against? That's carried. Thank you. That finishes item 9. Takes us back onto the agenda. So we're now on to item 7. And that's Colchester Commercial Holdings Limited Annual Report, which I've no doubt there'll be a bit more discussion around. I'm going to ask Richard Carr to introduce this, and then we'll take questions, comments, et al.
Thank you, Chair. And actually what this seeks to do is to go a little bit beyond just the specific requirement on HL to share with you the annual report at this stage. So that is contained at Appendix 1, which hopefully gives a flavour of what the Amphora group of companies were involved in during the year that ended in March 2023. And then flowing from that, we've also attached for your review and information the audited accounts for that same year as well. We then, in Appendix 3, sought to give you an assessment of the current financial position for the companies up to the 6-month point. I think I should just say there that you do need to bear in mind that as part of the strategy for Amphora that was approved by Cabinet only last week, we do make the point that an important piece of work that we still to do is around appraising options for Colchester Fibre. And until that piece of work has been completed, I think we just need to be a little bit sensitive to the potential for income figures to change a little bit in that context. And then finally, what we're suggesting, or what we've done here, is to put forward a budget, a one-year budget at this stage for the next financial year. And I need to explain again that the reason we've only sought to put a budget proposal forward at this point in time for 1 year, rather than a full business plan, is inextricably linked to that need to carry out a fundamental review of the options for Colchester Fibre. But we thought it would be helpful to give an indication of the position as far as next year is concerned. In doing that, i.e. looking at proposals for next year, I think I would describe the approach that we've taken to income as cautious. So we're absolutely trying to ensure that we've got good visibility about the income projections rather than relying on conjecture there. So based on where there are existing contracts in place, or where based on past experience we have a reasonable expectation of income. And we've also taken the opportunity to rebase the proposed management fee. So this is the fee that the City Council pays to Amphora, covering services, those now more limited number of services where effectively the council is Amphora's customer. And so what we've sought to do is to make sure that we are adopting an approach which is based on cost recovery in a way that is transparent and open to all. We're also suggesting some adjustments to the way in which Amphora collects an overhead charge from the City Council, which is a combination of the fact that Amphora will be a slimmer organisation by virtue of the future strategy proposals. But also, I think over the years, we've got a degree of misalignment between the services being consumed by Amphora and the costs. So basically, the approach that we've taken is to try and make sure that we kind of rebase the position going forward. So bearing in mind that obviously you'll need some indication of what all that looks like to factor into the City Council's financial planning, we've actually brought that slightly ahead of time. But I'll stop there, and obviously we'll try and, between myself, Alistair, and also I'm joined by Rachel Bell, our finance manager, on the line, we'll try to cover off any questions that flow from this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. So there's quite a lot of documentation before us under this item. I just want to remind everyone, however, that the budget going forward is a confidential item. So at this stage, please don't introduce or ask any comments or ask any questions on that until we move into the Part B section at the end of the meeting. Councillors, comments, questions, remarks? Councillor Summings.
Yes. Are we going through each of those items one by one? Are we going to go through the annual report, then the accounts, and then the other bits, or do you want everything together?
Let's take everything together.
Okay. I just want to say that I support the decisions and the direction this is going, and then to go on to say that the way the decisions have been made, I've got some questions about. and particularly about whether we've understood all the accounting aspects and all the implications for CCC of what we're doing with closing down Kale. And so we came to the cabinet meeting last week and the decision was made, and questions were asked about these by Councillor Willits and myself, and we were told, oh, well, we have to get advice and we don't know quite how it's going to work. I think there could be some quite big impacts on the general fund. And I'd just like to list out what I think they might be, and Chris Hartgrove has very kindly given me some answers on it, but basically saying, oh, we don't know yet. I mean, first of all, we've got, according to the accounts, about 1.7 million lent to Kale, which is an underwater company by 510,000. And while there was a hope that Kale would go ahead and that the losses were short term, I think that hope's probably dwindled into the distance, and we're probably going to have to provide something against that 1.7 million. That's assuming Kale's balance sheet is sound and all those assets are sound. So there's a chunk there that we need to look at. There's another chunk, because on Kale's balance sheet is 1.2 million invested in something. We don't know quite what. It may be some equipment that could be sold. It may be a hole in the ground. I don't even know whether the hole for the heat pump system, a very promising heat pump system, I don't know whether that's sitting on our balance sheet at the council or it's sitting on Kale's balance sheet, but there's certainly something there, and probably quite big, that needs looking at. There's a grant there, and we don't know whether that grant will have to be paid or what the terms of repayment are. We don't know whether pausing or omitting, the accounts actually say we're making it dormant, okay? Those are the words in the accounts, so I'm going to use that word, making the company dormant. Does that mean that we have to repay the grant? And has that been looked at? And so it goes on. I think that probably sitting on the whole trouble we've had with these companies is that we have the annual report, which makes it sound as if the companies own all these assets and doing all these wonderful things, but of course they don't. All the assets are still sitting on the council's balance sheet. Most of what's going on in the companies is recycling management fees around the place. But you know, we need to. In fact, one of the questions I'd ask is whether in future years we need the glossy annual report. We've got some quite good accounts, and thanks for those, from Scrut and Bland. And can we not just put the PR bits we want to into those, as we do in some other companies, and cut out the glossy stuff? It makes it sound big, but actually it's quite a small set of companies with quite small balances on. And the big ones are sitting on our balance sheet. Have we looked at what happens to those when suddenly we start dormanting these companies? So I think the central point is that in future, we really need to work out the financial implications of what we're doing before we make the decisions, not after. And I know that I'm sure we won't get answers to all those questions today, and I understand that. But it's just that we've got other decisions on this group coming up, and we really need to be just a whole lot more on the ball.
Thank you, Councillor Sunnucks. I think you make some valid points about being aware before we start, but I would just say we are where we are. We're not going back to when CCHL was first established, so it's about how do we get from where we are now to where we want to be going forward. I'm aware that you asked our Deputy Finance Officer about a number of questions about the reports, and that you've had some fairly substantial responses to those. I've asked that our officer, our Democratic Services Officer this evening, just print 1 or 2 copies of that. So if anybody would like to see a copy of those, if you haven't circulated them to other members, then I've got 1 or 2 spare copies here. So I don't know, Andrew or Chris, do you want to come back on anything that Councillor Sunnucks has raised?
If I can. Chair. So I think it's an unusual situation in as much as that I've never actually had to deal with the unwind of a company or hibernation of a company, I suppose, with assets that are difficult to value, I suppose, really. And so we will need to take technical advice on it, and we're in conversation with individuals who can provide that advice. And we'll need that in order to make the proper accounting entries. But I suppose, pragmatically, I would say that the expenditure incurred in getting to this point is, one way or another, coming back to the council. So, I think the council will have to pick up the accumulated costs incurred in terms of getting to this point thus far. It was undertaken with the best of intentions, and but then proved market conditions made it not viable at this moment in time, and therefore it has to be paused. Hibernation, the decision was taken by Cabinet in that regard, and the financial transactions will have to be unwound. But as I say, the cumulative amount of those financial transactions is the cumulative amount of those transactions, and that's coming back to the council one way or the other. I guess the risk really is around the Bays grant, really, in terms of whether we can hold on to that. And the advice that I'm receiving thus far is that Bays aren't asking for the money back. But I recognise that that's a risk, really. But on the assumption that we retain the grant, we undertook the work that we undertook, working with Bays and with their agreement and understanding, and so the belief is that we can retain that grant, and the work we've done can be offset against that grant, and so the net position for the council is well, I suppose, as I say, the accounting entries will need to be undertaken, and that's what the advice we're seeking. But I think in a cash position, or at least in cash terms, provided we don't have to repay the grant, the position is neutral, depending, irrespective of what the transactions are. Unless there's something completely unexpected now, and I'm not aware of that at this moment in time. But that's why we need to protect the technical advice around it.
Thank you, Mr. Small. I'll bring you back in, Councillor Sunnox, just a moment. I think I would just like at this stage to remind committee members that I think Councillor Sunnox and Councillor Smithson in particular have been quite forensic in looking at CCHL over the last 18 months, as well as myself and Councillor Smith. As a result of the start of that process, we've ensured that CCHL is coming regularly to this committee for oversight and for review. There's been an oversight group established, and I want to thank Richard Carr, the Interim Managing Director, for steering that oversight group to the culmination of the decisions that were taken by Cabinet last week and are before us this evening. So I think there's been a recognition that there needed to be work done around the Amphora groups and CCHL at large. So, and I think that is the responsibility that this group has taken on over the last 8 months, with asking questions, with ensuring that we've looked in detail at what is happening with CCHL. And a recognition by the leader of the council and the chief executive of the council that decisions needed to be taken fairly quickly to ensure that the risk was reduced as quickly as possible from some of these companies. I don't think any of us believe that we're quite at the end of that road yet, but I think we're travelling in the right direction. And the recognition is that the Governance and Audit Committee should be overseeing what is happening as we go forward as well. So some of the questions that we may not have the answers to this evening, I'm sure we'll ultimately get the answers to as we continue to monitor CCHL very carefully as it moves into the future. I'll come back to you now, Councillor Sunnox.
Yes, I agree with a lot of what you said, and my questions are forward-looking in that we have looked at one company now. We've got another one. We've got another one, if not two, to look at, and I have a lot of experience actually in restructuring companies, so I understand that it's not, you know, it's not a particularly easy thing to do. We've just got to try and get ahead of it. I also agree that this committee has come on miles since last year, when we had an annual report. No one had any accounts at all at that stage. You had to go to Companies House. The accounts had been done, and they were sitting at Companies House, but we actually had a presentation from where not a single figure was there. This year, we've got the glossy presentation with an entire, the board of directors disclosed there. I think there's only one director who's the same as are on the board now. I mean, the directors have been in and out, and so I think this committee's done well to take on the role of scrutinising it. And my final question would be this: can we come back when you've figured out what the impact? I think it could be quite a big hit to the general fund. We've only got limited reserves. It could be quite a big hit to the general fund when we straighten out all those accounting adjustments that have been needed. And can we, you know, making an objective to come back, say in January, with a report on what the impact is, so that we've got to the bottom of it all?
I think we've said all along that this committee wants to oversee what is happening with CCHL. We've agreed how we will do that. We've agreed to do that. Similarly with CBH, although we haven't had the question marks about CBH, so we're taking a lighter touch in terms of that. I think when we come to the work programme on the agenda, we'll determine whether or not January is the appropriate time. But I take your point that we need to come back and review where we're at with CCHL sometime in the new year. Is there anything else, Andrew, that you want to pick up? Thank you. Richard, anything that you want to come back on?
No. Sorry. No, I don't think I do need to add anything to the explanation that Andrew's given us, because obviously the transaction is a matter for how the council best protects its interests. I just wanted to reiterate what I said at the cabinet meeting on the position with Bays, which is they are travelling on the assumption that we may yet proceed with the project, albeit through a different vehicle. And I think it's quite important to maintain that position in order to safeguard the council's position. I take on board the comment about the extent of the annual report, and I would envisage something being much slimmer in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
I need to ask the question, Chair, if I may. I mean, it's unavoidable. This has got to be done, isn't it? We all recognise that in Cabinet, done the deed. But how fleet of foot will it be if the circumstances ever change in some time in the future that we have to reverse the situation of Reed in energising Kale? How quick could that happen? I mean, there's a lot more educated people around the table that can tell that. I tried to look up that sort of thing, but failed miserably. But if somebody could say that could be done at the stroke of a switch and fairly quickly, that would be, I think, suitable. And then we've got that sitting in dormancy for when it's needed in the future. If somebody could answer that, I'd be very grateful.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. From my perspective, my understanding is that the reason for putting the company into dormancy is so that it can be reinstated very quickly. But I'll defer to, as you call it, more expert advice.
So I'm not sure I'd put myself forward as an expert on company law and all these things, but you're right in terms of it could be done quickly. That said, I don't think the issue is about resurrecting or taking a company out of hibernation. I think it's all of the kind of thinking that needs to precede it as to whether that's the right course of action. That's the issue, isn't it? So there's actually no great difficulty in, as I say, taking a company out of hibernation, but it's all the thinking that goes into it beforehand.
Thank you, and I think that's a really valid point, because what we don't want to do is rush over the cliff a second time. Any other? I don't see any other. Councillor Willett.
Chairman, having read through all these documents, I have sort of a litany of questions, some of which are important, some of which are not. Would you like me to ask them one at a time, or ask all 23 in one go? Perhaps I'll start asking them one at a time, and you can tell me when to stop, Chairman.
Can I just ask whether we really need to deal with all 23 this evening, or whether there are one or two focal questions and comments that you have, and the more specific detailed ones that are for information are better dealt with in writing by the officers?
Yes, sure, Chairman. The first question I have is one that's always perplexed me, and I've never got a satisfactory answer, and that is we have a hefty management fee being paid to the companies, and they pay back a small dividend. So, for instance, give you an example, assuming we pay them a management fee of 2 million and we get 200,000 dividend back, why do we not just pay 1.8 million pound as a fee and not bother with a dividend? I've never quite understood why it is we must have the principle of a dividend payment coming back to the council when this is effectively a captive company. I can see that if the companies were working for a number of other customers, then this might be a material matter. And when we set up these companies, Chairman, it was our intention that this would be a pool of expertise using what had been understood in the Colchester projects and extending that out to bring in revenue from other non-Colchester City Council customers. That was always seen as the natural expansion point to make perhaps what is not viable now a viable company. Thus, we have the glossy brochures. The whole of Amphora seems to be set up to sell its services not just to the City Council, but to a wider range of organisations that have sort of similar subcontracting problems and need things doing in a quality, known way, using the example of the way the services are provided to Colchester as the selling point for greater things. So that was my first question. Why do we have to have a dividend? Is there some reason in company law or from the council's articles that we have to do it in what seems a very ponderous way, and we don't just net it down to the minimum?
Thank you, Councillor Willett. I would just say you've chaired this committee. You've been a member of this committee for a number of years, since the inception of CCHL. And it's interesting that at this late stage you raise that question. However, I think that's part of the reasoning behind the way in which the direction of travel is going over CCHL. That when the detailed review of CCHL was undertaken, those very questions were asked at that time and have been part of the decision making. Richard, I can see you itching to respond.
Well, if I may, because I think it is a fundamental issue, and I do have some sympathy with the point that you make. And I think, I mean, obviously I can only comment on the position from March this year. But what I think may have been the intention and what panned out in practice are two slightly different things. So I think that concept of selling services on to other organisations besides providing some services back to the City Council perhaps didn't pan out in quite the way that might have been anticipated. So if we take into account, for example, those staff who've been working within Amphora but supporting the delivery of the City Council's capital programme, theoretically, those services could be sold on to other organisations. In practice, that's not happened. I think it's largely been a capacity issue. In terms of the future arrangements, what we're trying to do, and I think this was an integral part of the proposals that were discussed at Cabinet last week, was to actually apply, I think, the very principle that you're suggesting, which is that where Amphora is involved in activity which is exclusively delivered back to the City Council, then that's paid for by a management fee. But there are some activities that Amphora is engaged in and has historically been engaged in, particularly around the staging of events, for example, which it has done for organisations other than the City Council. And I think in that context, that's where I think there is some merit in thinking about an arrangement which is bringing a dividend into the city, because it is income that would not otherwise be available to the city. So I think actually the direction of travel is moving very much towards the principle that you're advocating, actually.
Thank you. Councillor Willett, so I'm just going to remind you not to go through 23 questions, but just to pick out the ones that we can deal with this evening that aren't specific, that need the officers to go away and come back to you.
Well, Chairman, I mean, you can argue that none of the questions I was going to ask this evening need to be asked here. They could all be asked in writing. In fact, I could argue that we don't actually need a committee. We could just all put our questions into the Chief Executive and respond on all these matters in writing, if that is your wish.
No, I'm not intending to curtail the opportunity to comment, remark and ask question. I just don't want us to get bogged down in minutiae. So if there are generalist questions, if there are questions about the documents that are in front of us this evening, then by all means ask them.
Okay, sure. Test one then, Chairman. The next issue, I wonder about the employees that Amphora have and have had during the year under which we are reviewing. If we look at note 5 in the consolidated report, we see that there were 133 employees in the previous year, 129 this year. Last year the pay bill was was an average of 18,000 per employee. This year it's 20,000 per employee. That's up 11%. One of the rationales for having the company was that we would be more flexible in the way we remunerated staff. Now, unless I've misunderstood the 133 and 129, and these are actual number of people rather than full-time equivalent, then it would seem that we are paying people a particularly low wage in Amphora because the 18 and 20k covers all the overheads, the pension and so on. So I wondered whether we could have a note of explanation in the context of the 22 accounts that are here as to why it is the average pay appears to be so low, whereas I thought we would have been employing top flight experts in some of these areas, which would have had a significant uplift to the staff pay bill to achieve the sort of quality results which we were expecting from Amphora.
Thank you, Councillor Withers. Have you got more detailed questions about the accounts rather than coming back on each?
I'm happy to ask them all in writing, Chairman, if that's your wish.
Yeah.
If we don't want debate.
Because I'm just thinking if we go over every individual query that you might have, and I take the point about this one and about the salaries and the expectations of pay when CCHL was first established and individual Amphora companies were first established. The expectation was that they would attract, as you quite rightly point out, experts in their field. And that would result in a very positive and fruitful company, or companies, I should say. So I'm going to ask Richard Carr just to respond to that question, but I think if your other questions are similarly detailed, it's probably best that you ask those in writing of the officers, and then the answers are circulated to all members. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think what this question shines a light on is the varied nature of the services that Amphora has historically been delivering. So there are some services where absolutely the intention has been to recruit and retain high levels of expertise. But there are other aspects of service that are delivered by Amphora which frankly are dependent on staff who, whilst very valued, are not providing that kind of level of professional expertise steeped on years of training in the way that I think you might be envisaging. So again, the distinction I would draw is, for example, those colleagues that are involved in the delivery of technical support to support the council's capital programme or the estates function, whereas I suspect, and Alistair might want to supplement what I've just said, that overall salary level is impacted by people that are working within the CCTV arrangements or delivering the helpline service. And that's a very different type of service and has a very different staff profile compared with those where you're really needing people that have extensive professional qualifications. But perhaps, Alistair, if you might want to supplement what I've just said.
No, certainly. Firstly, to clarify that the numbers here are not FTE headcount. So across Helpline and CCTV, there are 36 employees, but it's not 36 FTE. So therefore, it will dilute your equation of per head. And also, very much the nature of the events business, the casual resource that we bring in to operate the events. Again, will be a headcount, but not contracting number of hours. We pay them on the hours that they operate. So in terms of to be able to make the equation from total salaries to total number of heads is distorted by the points that you make.
I do think it's essential that this point is clarified in the accounts. Otherwise, it can be quite misleading as to the size and scope of the company.
Okay, thank you. So are you happy, Councillor Willits, to put the remainder of your questions in writing?
Not happy. Not happy, Chairman.
Are you willing?
With
Are you
guidance,
willing?
I will do so.
Thank you. And if you could share those questions with other members of the committee, I would be grateful. Thank you. Are there any questions or comments that you want to make in the public arena this evening before I move on? Councillor Summings.
Yes, it's about going to expertise again. We're bringing all the properties in the group under into our, I've forgotten what it's called, but we're centralising the management of it. Yes, corporate landlord, that's right. So do we have anyone with investment rather than management surveying expertise to run that? And where will they sit? Will they sit within the CCHL structure, or will they sit within the council?
I'm looking at the chief exec because I think at this point I would like to bring Pam Donnelly in, because I know that she's obviously overseeing the transformation, and that includes where individuals will be going and where they will be. Thank you, Pam.
Yes, and I'm in a position, Councillor Summits, to update you on the interim arrangements we've recently arrived at. So we have recruited an interim support specialist expertise. Whether she has investment expertise, I'm not familiar enough with her CV to know that, but her job is interim in the sense that she will have the responsibility of bringing the people resources from Amphora and CBH, there are 18 staff coming from CBH as well, into our centralised model. And just to remind colleagues, this was part of the report provided by CIPFA earlier in the year, which of course came to the Oversight Committee, which you mentioned earlier. So Patricia Barry's job will be to try to meld those resources into a single centralised resource, which will give the City Council, for the first time in many years, control of its assets and therefore the ability to make decisions about further investment, disposal or alternative use. She's only in her first few weeks. There will be an opportunity, I think I'm right in saying, to meet Patricia at our SLT or members meeting within the next week or so. Don't quote me on that, I just need to check her attendance. But I'm meeting her next week for the very first time, and what I'd expect her to produce is a way forward for the management and access to expertise that corporate landlord model will need in order to succeed. So very early days, but I think it might be helpful in terms of our discussion later with regard to the work programme to bring that work to this committee for scrutiny and oversight as we start to shape, and it's back to your earlier comment, Councillor Sunnox, about having the opportunity to comment before we make decisions. And proposals will emerge about the way forward for the management and leadership of those assets. So I suggest that might be an area that this committee might want to look at. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, you know, there's a lot of work going on around CCHL and has been going on around CCHL for the last 12 months, and it's nowhere near concluded. Members of this committee who were here in the last municipal year will have seen that SIPFA report because it came to the Governance and Audit Committee, so we're all familiar with what was contained in the SIPFA report. I think the question you were asking, though, Councillor Sunnox, was about property oversight, wasn't it? Rather than just personnel. So
yes, I thought I'd answered that, but clearly I haven't. So the oversight of the assets themselves will firmly sit in the City Council. I'm sorry, I thought I'd made that point. At the moment, we're trying to work out our leadership and management arrangements going forward, which is why we've taken quite a big step actually in recruiting the expert advice from Patricia. And I think you've met with her already, haven't you, Richard? And I know the people who have met with and recruited Patricia feel that she has sufficient expertise in local authority and management of assets to be able to advise us on an appropriate way forward. But the bottom line is the control and oversights of our assets will lie within the City Council.
thank you. Councillor Sunnox, did you want to come back?
Just very, very quickly, absolutely welcome that it's going to be centralised. But just to say, if it's going to be centralised, I think it's a great idea for it to come to this committee, and we want a little bit better than RAG ratings for making property decisions. I hope that's trickled down into the system.
Thank you. I think it's fair to say that we probably have enough to do, and when we've been discussing the corporate landlord model, the suggestion is that the council probably wants to establish another panel or committee to oversee that. But that's again a decision to be taken in the future. Anything else on the items that are in front of us? I'm not seeing any other indications. So if I take us back to paragraph 2, we're asked to review and note the CCHL annual report for 22-23, which I think we've been doing. To review and note the final accounts for 22-23, which we've done to a great extent, albeit Councillor Willits will be asking for some more answers in written form, and to review and note the half-year financial position of CCHL and its subsidiaries. The final item is 2.4, and that's to review the budget proposals, but as I've already indicated, we'll do that in the confidential section of the meeting this evening. So everybody happy with 2.1, 2.2, 2.3? You'll be voting against. All right. Well, there's no real vote, it's just a review, but your remarks are noted, Councillor Willits. Right, thank you. So thank you. All right, as you're asking for a vote, I'm happy to take a vote. Right. Okay. Right. Those of you who believe that we've amply reviewed, please indicate. Those of you who don't, that's 2. Okay, thank you. All right, I'm now going to move us on to the next item, which is the Q2 monitoring report. I'm going to ask Chris, I think this is your introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. Item 8 then, which appears on pages 1412, 164 of your agendas this evening, sets out the Q2 position for 23-24. In other words, the forecast outturn for this, the 23-24 financial year, based on available information as of the 30th of September 2023. On to the detail then. The report covers the revenue position for both the general fund and the housing revenue account, as well as the capital position for the general fund. Colchester City Council, as with many councils up and down the country, is experiencing a number of financial challenges as it tries to manage the local impact of what is seemingly a never-ending series of shocks to the economy. The table in paragraph 6.1 on page 144 reveals a forecast general fund net revenue overspend of £1.447 million as at the end of September. This is a slight deterioration compared to Q1, where a £1.34 million overspend was forecast at the end of June. The Q2 forecast overspend reflects a projected overspend of 3.266 million on service budgets, which is further analysed in appendices A, B and C. But on the plus side, the overspend on service budgets is offset by a projected underspend of 1.819 million on capital financing costs. But members should note the deduction in paragraph 1.7 on the pay award. The publication deadline for this report was reached just before the Council's updated pay offer of £1,925 consolidated for 23-24 was made. If the award is subsequently settled in accordance with that offer, it will add a further 600,000 to the general fund revenue budget pressure. Paragraph 6.2 then on page 145 summarises the main spending pressures, with a range of challenges being identified within corporate services, for example, with a forecast overspend of 1.123 million. Notable factors there include the anticipated shortfall in forward dividends of 289,000. However, as with Q1, the biggest single spending pressure relates to the homelessness service, which, in common with many councils across the country, is experiencing a surge in demand from service users, which is driving a projected overspend of 860,000, which is up from 772,000 in Q1. There is also a projected one-off shortfall of 551,000 on garden waste income due to the technical accounting requirements, which require income received late in 23-24 to be spread over more than one financial year. The funding position is presented in the table at paragraph 6.3 on page 146. It shows a mixed picture. Whilst there's little variation on local tax, in other words, council tax and business rates, at this stage, there is some good news on the local government finance settlement, as mentioned in Q1, with the council receiving 204,000 in revenue support grant, which was not assumed in the original budget. The table in paragraph 6.6 on page 147 expands on the detail provided in Q1 and now includes itemised forecasts for all reserves relevant to the budget. It also reconciles the £3.943 million use of reserves implicit in the overall spending forecast which appears in the table in paragraph 6.3. Unfortunately, whilst this is a step forwards in reporting, as explained in paragraph 6.7, opening and closing balances are unfortunately withheld at this stage, pending the finalisation of the statement of accounts for 22-23. So hopefully this will be illustrated within my Q3 update early in the new year. The housing revenue account budget, presented in paragraph 7.1 on page 148, is projected to be on course, which, if this materialises, would protect the HRA balance at around 4.6 million, as illustrated in the table in paragraph 7.4 on page 149. Turning briefly to General Fund Capital, presented in section 8, beginning on page 149. Capital spending has continued to be relatively subdued in Q2, with an underspend of 33.52 million forecast on corporate services, reflecting for the most part the fact that the original anticipated loan advances of 26.7 million to the Council's new housing company are not now expected to materialise in 23-24, with the delay associated with the review of Run 4. Forecast underspending of £10.89 million on the Town Deal projects is the next largest item to note. And finally, in section 9 on page 151, at the time of preparing this report, officers from the Council and CBH are reviewing the housing revenue account capital programme to establish the in-depth position for 23-24. And that's, I can confirm, it's actually feeding through to us as we speak now. So a full update will be included within the Q3 report. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hartgrove. I just want to start by saying thank you for a much clearer, cleaner report that we've ever had at this committee. It's so much easier to follow where we're actually at Q2 than it has been previously, with all due respect to our previous section 151 officer. So thank you for tidying that up and making the picture much more open, I would suggest, than it has been previously. Questions or comments? Councillor Sunnox?
Yes, I'd like to echo the clarity. It's great. Thanks. The big thing we have to, possibly the biggest thing we have to do as this committee is to get our heads round how much runway we have. We know we're deficit spending. And you can only do that for so long. And we need to know, because that will give us a sense of the urgency about the budget. And perhaps we're all struggling with it at the moment, and you guys are new, so, let's make sure that you ground yourself properly before you start defending everything that's here. But as it sits at the moment, I think this is a great new table you've done at 6.6. That tells us we're deficit spending at 3.943 million this year. And we know there's another 600,000 to go on top of it for the pay rise, and that'll become 1.2. I don't know when the 600,000 comes from, but it's sort of roughly about 1.2 million a year. So we've got 3.9 here on this table. We've got 600,000. Then we've got all the kale stuff and all those write-offs that are going to hit the general fund, I fear. I don't know where else they can go. So we need to get our heads around that. And then we need to, once we've found out what our annual run rate of deficit spending is, we need to see how many years it is before we've gobbled up all our reserves. And we've got two figures. If you take the accounts literally, you've got 10 million in reserves to use for deficit spending. You've got lots of other things that are used for other things, but they're earmarked reserves. They're presumably earmarked for something. We need to get to the bottom of what those are and how much we think we'll be able to release. And I think it's somewhere between 10 million and 32 million we've got to use up with deficit spending. And I'd very much like to ask that we try and over the coming months get to the bottom of that so that we can, in fact, we need to do it quite urgently because we need to know where we are for the budget. And my feeling is that actually we're more in the poop than we think we are, that, you know, 5 million a year is a lot to be deficit spending, and it's it's a big gap to cover.
Thank you, Councillor Sonic. So I ask Mr. Small to come back in at this point.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose, in-year deficits aside, I would say that the objective in bringing a budget forward for next year is to bring forward a balanced budget that doesn't necessarily rely upon use of reserves, unless, of course, reserves are proven to be sufficient and it's appropriate to use them, but that will be part of the overall Cabinet's decision in recommending a budget to the council, I suppose, really. But just because there's an overspending in the current year doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to factor in the continued rate of use of reserves at that same level into future years, I suppose, is the point I wanted to make.
But of course, our accounts say that's exactly what's going to happen. So the draft 22 accounts show deficit spending going over the horizon. And we probably need to change those so that, because otherwise the reader of those accounts would conclude that we're heading fast for something unpleasant.
Thank you. I mean, you know, there are economists and there are economists. And I know we're looking at numbers and you can read numbers in different ways. If we take the 850,000 that we're currently projecting to have overspent on housing, on homelessness, that's a one-off, all being well, isn't it? And partly that's exacerbated by central government not getting its finger out and sorting out a decent review of private rentals. The situation with CCHL, again, is a one-off that isn't going to present itself to the council in the future. So I think we just need to be a bit cautious about suggesting that we're running very quickly over a cliff, because I'm not sure at this stage that we are. I'm just going to bring Councillor Corey in his resources portfolio at this stage.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come forward and give some reassurance and a bit of political direction, because the officers can only answer so much of that. So it is not typical. We do not want to be using as much of the reserves to plug gaps, but we do have to look at the economic picture nationally and the councils nationally and where we are locally as well. So yes, it is not normal and it's not something we forecast to do. We do not want to be using this this amount of reserves. Reserves are there for a rainy day, and we are experiencing quite a storm in the economy. So therefore, we are using them at this point. And actually, Chair, you use some of the language that I've written here, which is we can break down the pressures. We can break them down into one-off pressures. So, for example, this year, the garden waste accountanting techniques. So we assume we will get in a considerable bit of income there, but we have to account it next year, not this year. So that's 500,000 taken out of this year's budget. We've then got the sort of medium-term pressures. So, for example, the homelessness issue, paying for the housing, coming up to about £1 million out of this year's budget. So that is a pressure, but it's not a pressure I don't see going away anytime soon. As you say, we haven't got really any national solutions to that. It's an issue for many people up and down the country. But what we will do, and what I've spoken with Chris about, of course, is how we forecast next year. So we are now increasing the budget in the forecast to say, right, we're overspent by this much this year, therefore, let's understand that. Let's not predict it's going to be fine next year. Let's predict we will have to spend more. So let's budget for that. So we've taken that into account. So those sort of shorter term pressures, those medium term pressures, you either account for or you try and address. And we are addressing a number of areas that I'll come to shortly. The others are the reoccurring. There are reoccurring pressures, and that is like the pay. Okay, £600,000. We have to absolutely address where that is from. So that leads me on to one of the biggest ways in which we will address those medium to longer term and reoccurring pressures. And that is through the transformation that has been planned and been running. We've had parts of the transformation of the structure, and that involves staff, but we are having, it's coming to Cabinet early December in terms of leadership discussions, and then that will begin to work through the governance systems into the new year. And we will have quite big decisions to make as to how we reorganise this council and how we transform staff and the structure. And there will be cost savings there. I won't say more than that, but you can understand what those implications will mean. And that is about making the council more lean. That is absolutely about forecasting forward that we can't spend as much on the organisation. We are going to have to do less. We're going to have to do less with less, but we have agreed to pay those staff more in line with the unison pay agreements. So I just wanted to try and explain that we've got those short-term pressures that we believe we can solve and we can put reserves to. We've got those medium-term ones that we are reforecasting, looking at how we address them or how we accept that increased cost into the budget for next year. And then we've got those that have been baked in, and we have to understand how we cut our cloth accordingly to address them. So for me, that is clear. And we've actually, it's good having both Andrew and Chris here as a new pair of eyes, and we've been looking through, presenting better, being more open with how we can address things. But also, with both Chris and Andrew coming in, they see that Colchester is not in a bad shape at all. We've been prudent before, we've been prudent with the reserves, and that's why we can use them. And we're looking at how to use them in an effective way or make investments to save money. I'll stop talking now, but I just wanted to make sure and give you some reassurance. We are not looking at deficit spending for years to come. It's mainly due to economic pressures and then how we cut our cloth accordingly for the future.
Thank you, Councillor Corey. Councillor Sunnucks, I see your hand twitching over the microphone.
Yes, I just don't think we're getting it. And I don't think with the attitude we've had laid out, I don't think we'll get near to solving these sort of problems. We've heard before about how we're going to make transformation savings of 5 million and all these things. We're never quite told what they are. And when it comes to this year's budget, we as an opposition won't put up with that. We'll want to know actually what they are, what it means, and know that it's gone right through. What I think it means is that it's salami slicing. It's a little bit of everything, including our pay. And the unions have, in my view, rightly pulled us up, and we've had to pay, and I support that. But I think it was salami slicing. I think we're salami slicing all over the place, rather than making the decisions we have to make. And I get particularly upset as a numbers man when I hear people saying, oh, well, there's different ways of looking at numbers, and if we turn the paper around and look at it upside down, we'll come to a different conclusion. I believe to the bottom of my soul that they're numbers and that they're important and that we need to pay attention to them. We need to get to grips with them properly and stop blaming other people and start looking in the mirror and sorting ourselves out properly. I don't think we're there yet. We've got a long way to go.
Thank you, William. And of course, the Conservative group will have the opportunity to put an alternative budget to Council in February, if it has an alternative view.
We will do if we can get the information and the access we need, which we're at the moment not getting.
I think the leader of the council has come to the table with an indication that he wishes just to comment around transformation and the suggestion that there's just salami slicing going on. Councillor King.
Thank you. If I was in your shoes, I might take the same view. There's inevitably a lag between the work that's underway coming through and our ability to share it and digest it. We're almost there. So if Mark will bear with me, I'll just walk you through I'll give you a flavour of conversations just this afternoon. So this afternoon, and I'm happy actually to share this to the committee rather than walk through it here in detail. We had a good conversation looking at the medium-term financial forecast. Beginning, middle and end accepting that actually it is all about the numbers. So is the language going to have to be all about the numbers. So, and I say this very respectfully, because some things in the future path for this council will be about transformation in the terms that people understand it. There will be some places and areas where we'll be able to do some things better in a way that hasn't been done before, and we could feel some pride in that. Not there yet. But mostly, to be blunt, this is about cost reduction. This is about taking cost out and making some hard decisions, not salami slicing, but that's been done before. And I'm not going to say that there won't be some places where it might look like that. This is about fundamental decision making. There's a list of 18 odd items, some which any member here who's been paying attention to the challenges we're starting to address will recognise. We'll share that paper and you'll see it. Next week, when members have the opportunity to listen to Pam and the senior leadership team, they will get, and we've kind of refreshed how we'll do this in the last day or so, they will get everything we've got. It'll come to members before it comes to Cabinet. We're not going to put process, a conversation we've had a few times, ahead of, I quote one William Sunnox, a laser-like focus on cost, where money is going, and as a consequence of understanding the money better than we ever have done before, making decisions which will take out cost, take out jobs, and I say it very carefully because we are still in a process with the trade unions, so it has to be respectful and consultative and all that follows. So the analysis that's coming to us and the work that's being done that's fairly well advanced is about understanding against a whole variety of tests and challenges to what we do, what is the cost of that, and then the difficult thing for members as well, should we continue to do it? And triangulating this to reserves and their use over the coming years. So this is a grown-up conversation. We haven't had it yet, I agree. We have absolutely, I'm afraid, no choice but to have it in the coming months. So the way I want this to work is actually, this is putting the politics for a moment to one side, is about all members feeling that they've got an opportunity to participate, to say what they care most about, because we have to acknowledge many of us will care about a lot of things we take for granted. And when they're at risk, we might find some of us want to say that matters more than that. So there's a whole conversation around priorities as well. That starts as fast as we can get it to happen on the back of the work that has been shared with some members already, which gives a line by line sense of where money goes. It's extraordinary we haven't had it, frankly. It's all been meshed together, which means transparency, which is essential for good decision making, has not been as good as it should be. It's getting better. Next week, we'll start that member process, challenge process, which will lead us to the place we need to be. Will lead us to making decisions we do not want to do, we have to make. And will lead us to do it at pace. I'm really determined about this. I use the phrase, the words I used with you, William, in our good exchange at Cabinet. I hope you thought it was. I think at the time it felt that way, which is a laser-like focus, right? Focus on money, spend, social value, and other determinants, including political ones, are part of the equation for decision making, but they, in my view, I will argue, come second. Understand what you're doing, understand its cost, understand the implications for employment in our future, understand the implications for our partners, right? Much of what we do here well is done with other people. We start to take the lid off that, but the work's had to be done. A lot of it has now been done, and we'll be able to sort of walk through that together with members. And that's the way, in my personal view, and I've talked to Councillor Dundas, amongst others, and it's his and your choice, members here, how much you want to be part of that. But it seems to me that's what we should be doing. We should be doing this together, because we will have the consequences of the decisions we make in principle over the coming weeks flow through into the budget, with all that will follow. Like, if I share the paper that I've had today on medium-term financial forecast with colleagues, you'll have to accept it in the form it's at. I might add a small personal commentary to it. I agree with Chief Exec, then you will have all I can give you, frankly, at this time. It will absolutely give you assurance that we do understand where we're at, we understand what comes next. And as I say, the invitation to members will be to be part of that process, and I'm sure that most will want to do that. Thank you, Chair, for your indulgence.
Thank you, Councillor King. And the Chief Exec has indicated an interest in just adding to that as well. So, Pam, I'll invite you.
Thank you. Next. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to comment. Much of what I wanted to say has been said by Councillor King, but after all, I'm the person that has the job with my team of making Councillor King's commitments translate into work done and action achieved. So I just want to say several things. I'll keep it brief. First of all, I'm really disturbed and surprised to hear that your access to officers has been restricted. First of all, as a member of the opposition, and we all know this because you all move in and out of opposition, access to officers has to be limited. There has to be some sort of restriction because of the nature of the way politics works. However, I was confident up until now that you had had sufficient access. If that's not the case, I want to know why and what the background to that is outside this meeting. Secondly, and I'm really passionate about what I'm going to say, we absolutely do know where we are. That doesn't mean that there aren't some variables that need to be pinned down, but the senior leadership team of this authority is absolutely committed to facing head on the reality of our medium-term financial position, which is not good. It is deteriorating, and it is deteriorating over the period of the medium-term financial plan. However, we have a plan, and we need to be given the chance to describe that plan, build it, translate it into a workable document that can translate the triangulation that Councillor King referred to. And there are three elements to that, as you'd expect with a triangle. First of all, there's a gap, and it's getting bigger. Secondly, there are reserves, which will help us to some extent smooth some of the transition that we need to make. And thirdly, there is a plan. So those are the three elements of the triangle. We'll make brief reference to the plans for transformation or cost cutting, which essentially will fit the council for the future. That's the idea. And if we were to do absolutely nothing, and of course that's not what we're going to do, our future looks bleak. But we are going to do something. We are going to reduce the operating costs of this organisation by 25% over the medium term. That will require radical and fundamental reform of what we do, how we do it, and where we do it, and who we do it with, making reference to some of our shared services aspirations. It will have a dramatic impact on our staff, and they know that. And I regularly communicate with our staff, as I do with Cabinet and as I will be with members, that the future is a very different one for Colchester City Council. It's one that we can't even begin to imagine. But essentially the council will, over that period of time, look very, very different so that it can live within its means and so that we can take part in what I believe is a brighter future for Colchester on the horizon. But what it needs is a solvent, resilient council to play its community leadership role in that brighter future. And it's my job to make sure that we set a course to achieve that. And I give this committee my commitment to do that.
Thank you, Pam. I've got Councillor Willett, and then I'm coming back to you, Councillor Senex. Councillor Willett?
Yes, Chairman, the issue of a Conservative alternative budget has been raised. That's a particle issue of matter, so I don't particularly want to speak at great length about it. I will talk about the practicalities of it. In the past, Chairman, and I'm thinking almost 10 years ago, we prepared an alternative budget. It was costed. We had a lot of officers' time to help us do it. When we get to the budget meeting, we have 5 minutes, perhaps 10 minutes to present it, and it can only be done in the form of deleting or adding words to the existing budget which is being proposed by the administration. It is impossible, Chairman, to present an alternative budget for something as complex as this council by means of deleting or inserting words and having 10 minutes to do it. Given that all the preparation that goes into the main budget, all the workshops, the presentations and so on. So if you are serious, and the challenge has been thrown down by you, Chairman, and many of your colleagues, that why don't the Conservatives present an alternative budget? We are happy to do so, but do not expect us to roll up on budget day and add or delete words to the administration's budget. It is not possible to do it that way. It really isn't. So you have to decide whether you want to go on taunting us on not producing a budget, or whether you really do want us to produce a challenge budget, an alternative way of doing things, in which case we're happy to rise to the occasion. But then council must be prepared to accept that it will have to be presented formally. It will take time, it will take council time, it may even take an alternative meeting to present it. If that is what you want to happen, we will do that, because it may well help the process of clarifying things in the mind. But the process that we've been offered in the past, insufficient support, insufficient time, a procedural system which does not allow us to present a budget properly, means that we waste our time if we rise to the taunts that we haven't produced a proper budget. So I think that is the view, and there needs to be a decision whether the Conservatives are going to present an alternative budget. And if so, we have to have the time to do it in council, the time to prepare it before. Thank you, Chairman. If I can now respond to just to the paper that we're discussing, and the very interesting things we've heard from the Chief Executive, and particularly the leader. I certainly don't see at this stage in the year an overspend of 1.447 as being a sort of catastrophic issue. It has ramifications if it can't be fixed. It has ramifications in the way Councillor Sunnox was explaining, with a limit to the extent we can go on drawing on reserves. There is perhaps a utopian thought that all the disasters in the world, the financial disasters, government putting pressure on us, not giving us the resources, the people wanting things and so on, that there's going to be a magic moment somewhere in the MTTF when all this will stop and we will see clear water, and all the services and all the costing and the transformation and everything else will just go into place, and we will have utopia in the city of Colchester. My view, Chairman, is that that's never going to happen. There are always going to be serious challenges. It doesn't matter whether it's a Conservative, Lib Dem or Labour government. They will have ideas, they will want to change things, they want to remove resources from the rich south to the poor north, or the other way round, and it is going to impact on us, and we will never know when it is going to happen. We may get 2 weeks notice, 2 months, even a year's notice, but these things will be dropped on us, and we as a council will have to deal with them, and the 1.447 million is in that class. But there is a good point what Councillor Sunnox was saying, that we do have limited reserves, and the MTTF, as we present it at the moment, does not really address some of these hard political and financial issues. It's a sort of an easy gloss over of what we're going to do in the next 3 years, projected on what we've done in the present year. And that approach is going to run out of steam fairly quickly. I'm delighted to see the vigour with which the Chief Executive is attacking the transformation process, but that at the moment is just looking for the most efficient and effective way of doing the things which we have resolved should be done at the moment. And if I think of my history at the council, I've been here over a decade, and in almost every year we've hatched 2 million or 3 million out of the budget. Just look back through the budget papers. Every year there have been cuts of that magnitude. And if we'd said 10 years ago, the enlightened Chief Executive is going to take £30 million out of our budget this year, we'd have said impossible, cannot be done. But it has been done over 10 years, and there is more to do. But I think there is a limit to the extent we can drive down the number of staff, drive up the performance, improve the efficiency of everything we do. There is a finite limit because we're dealing with human people doing their jobs. They're not robots, they're not automatons, and there will become a limit where we reach a plateau on what can be done. And to me, one of the most interesting documents which was tabled during the leaders' exceptionally useful set of consultations on budget was that which analysed what is mandatory for this council and what is discretionary. And I think we need to change perhaps our process, and it would certainly be central to a Conservative alternative budget, that concentration has to go into those things which are mandatory. We have to do them superbly well, superbly efficiently. And the better we do the mandatory things, the better that we get effective cost control and so on, the more it leaves us to do the discretionary things. But I think given the nature of the circumstances facing us and the fact that I see no end, it may be well the leader and the portfolio holder for resources do see calm waters ahead. I don't see calm waters ahead. Therefore, I think we've got to start looking very seriously at the discretionary expenditure items as part of the MTTF to say what happens. You know, there'll be scenarios, good and middle and bad, who knows, to see just what will need to be done in terms of ensuring that we cut our cloth to fit our budget, because we won't in future years be able to do everything. And the papers we have this evening are showing us just how difficult. You know, we gloss over by saying they're only one-offs. Some of them are one-offs, some of them are not. Some of them we understand, some of them we don't. Use your indulgence, Chairman, to come back to the garden waste project. There we have a project which I don't fully understand, and I don't know anyone who does fully understand it. You know, it's defined in terms of seasons which don't map onto our financial years. We have predictions about the expenditure, so the income that will come in from subscriptions, but no one can explain why it is we have the same £1.8 million outgoing to provide the service if we have one subscriber or if we have 80,000 subscribers. So they're not, even with something like the garden waste, which we have the throwaway comment in 1.4 of this report. It's not offered with the precision that we can actually understand what savings are going to come about because we're getting subscription in and because we no longer need to run so many freighters if we're only providing sort of 25% of the previous service. So we've got to take a precision approach to all these issues, and that has to be part of the transformation. I'm delighted to hear the Chief Executive say that it will be, but we do have to look long term at whether we can continue doing all services which we are at the moment, and that is going to be the most difficult decision in my view. What we're reading this evening, I think, leads us to the question: can we continue doing everything we're doing at the moment?
Thank you, Councillor Willits. And I share some of your summary about the last decade and where the council's finances have gone from to where they are today. And I accept your premise that we can't continue on this ever decreasing cycle that we've been going through over the last 10 years without that having a major impact on the City Council's ability to deliver. I think I'm slightly more optimistic, though, about what's over the horizon than you appear to be this evening. I'll just turn to Mr. Small to come back.
More of a reflection, Chair, if I may, really, actually, and calm waters is the one thing that, the prospect of calm waters is the one thing that keeps me going, actually. But you're absolutely right that it's one of those kind of utopian dreams that doesn't seem to materialise, and there's always shocks in the system, and that's one thing we've lived with over the past decade or more, actually. And, you know, is there a point where we'll no longer be able to make savings? I think, you know, if we'd gone back 10 years or so when the government first started reducing grant, I thought we said that point would come very quickly. And certainly all of the rhetoric and the messages back to government is that we can't continue to absorbing this level of grant reduction without local government falling to its knees really on one or the other. But actually, my reflection is that actually that challenge to local government has made local government really one of the best performing, most dynamic parts of the public sector as a whole, actually. And that burning platform in terms of grant reduction has forced us to be innovative and to think about what we do and think about doing things in different ways and challenging ourselves. Something I don't think necessarily would have happened in the same level or to the same extent if it hadn't been for that financial challenge. So I think local governments perform very well given the level of challenge that we've seen over the last decade or so. And I think it will continue to do so. And there's always new ways and innovative ways of finding solutions to the financial challenge that we're dealing with, really. A reflection on statutory, non-statutory services, really. I think, I don't think we should just concentrate on statutory services. I think we need to look at everything we do under the same microscope, really, and the same lens to make sure that we are delivering things in the most effective way. The one thing about statutory legislation is it's not very specific about what actually is statutory. So actually, there's always room, even in statutory services, to find better and more effective ways of solving the problems that enable us to live within the budgetary challenge. So, as I say, I think that's more of a reflection than anything else, Chair, but thank you.
Thank you for that reflection. I think that that sort of sums up the perspective from those of you who are the professionals as well, and those of you who advise and assist the politicians to make the decisions. I'm conscious of time. I'm going to take Councillor Cowling first.
Yeah, Monsieur, I'm new to this. First time, I find it incredibly interesting. Don't understand half of it, I will be frank, but listening to Councillor King, I believe, who's just said that he's got a paper he's willing to share with everybody. I've heard Dennis turn around and say that maybe as a position we set up an alternative budget. I might be completely speaking out of turn here. Would there be any chance that, I know Councillor Sunnock's puts a lot of effort and asks a lot of questions to the officers and to the Chief Executive, and would he, rather than possibly wasting officers' time by, as a Conservative group, we have to try and set an alternate budget, would, for example, Councillor Sunnock be able to sit with the governing team, with David King, with them, so he's got the access to the officers that maybe, and put his input in to save a lot of waste of time of us trying to do an alternative one. I think everyone here recognises we are all in difficult times. There's so much going on. Instead of toing throwing, let's work. Possibly, would it be a possibility that William or even Dennis could sit on and work with you, and let's do something together, like you said, for all members. But I think the experts are more there than that. So that's just my point.
Thank you, Councillor Powley. And I think, to be fair to Councillor King, over the last couple of years, he has included leaders from all of the groups in meetings around where we're at financially. And since the pandemic, there have been very, very expansive briefings that are available to all members of the council on finances, which weren't there previously. So I think those of us who have taken the opportunity to get our head around the financial position, the detail of the financial position, and as I've said on numerous occasions in this meeting and elsewhere, unfortunately, the majority of councillors don't really get numbers. They don't really have an interest in looking at budgets. And with all due respect to William, I know that there are empirical figures, but there are also imponderables always. None of us would have forecast, not quite a year ago, but 18 months ago, I don't think any of us would have sat around this table forecasting that inflation would go through the roof the way it did. Yeah, and 2 years ago, none of us would have forecast that interest rates were going to be as high as they are now. So there are always going to be imponderables that none of us can foresee. We have no idea what council tax collection rates are going to be in 12 months' time. The Chancellor in last week's budget found billions that weren't anticipated by the Treasury just, 6-7 months ago. So those are things that affect finances and affect finances of the council, albeit in a much smaller way, but they do have an impact, they do affect us. So I take your point, Councillor Powling. I think Councillor Dundas does have access to numbers, but in terms of the detail, as Councillor Willits has suggested, it's not so easy to put together an alternative budget in a complete alternative budget. I accept that, Councillor Willits, but there are opportunities for any of the political parties to put forward amendments to the budget on budget day. I'll come back to Councillor Sunnox, and then, as I say, I'm conscious of the fact that we're approaching 8 o'clock. We probably need a break before we move on to the final item and the confidential section. Councillor Sunnox?
Yes, I'm encouraged to hear the determined noises coming from the administration, but these are expressions. They're not the hard stuff. It's not there. It's not there. And when I hear people talking about imponderables and it's all so difficult, it's the actions that we take. It's the fact that we've bumped along, taking a little bit off here, a little bit off there, that I think downgrade the whole reputation of the council. I really do. I think salami slicing is so damaging, and it looks very much like sort of a salami slice to death organisation. We need just a much different approach to it all. And sitting here today, we're told by one person, we're told we're fine, we're strong. Another one says that we are deteriorating fast. One person says we know where we are. Another person says we don't know where we are because we don't even know what our reserves brought forward are. We're sitting there with no balance sheet, no audited balance sheet since 2020. And so we don't know whether 2021 will have to be adjusted on audit, and 2022 hasn't even been presented to audit. You know, we don't know where we are, and the future's coming at us fast. And just to take the practical thing about the opposition budget, yes, I'll do it, but I can't do it from the type of public briefings we're having with all councillors there. There's not time. I wouldn't waste people's other councillors' time in asking questions in that forum. I need to be able to sit down with the people the service heads, and it's been passed back to me that no way are we going to get access to the service heads. Okay, we can't have that. I need access to the finance team. I haven't seen a single figure. I haven't been on, I used to be invited to the alumni group, it was called. No longer invited to that. Well, perhaps I don't blame you for not doing that, but we're not nearly there yet. And I'm not getting the information I need. I need the access, and I'm talking about 4 or 5 hours of officer time, plus some time from the finance team. That's the sort of amount that I need to get to grips with this thing. And then I need an opportunity to present it, and thank you, Councillor Willits, for raising that. I can't do it in 5 minutes. Last time I tried to do it in 5 minutes, I got interrupted halfway through and told that I'd said something politically incorrect, and the whole thing was lost. I sat there absolutely fuming while some opposition councillors giggled. So I'm not doing it again. I'm fed up with it. I need the proper access. I need to be able to see the figures. Please, I'm happy to work with you, and I've got some experience that may or may not be useful, but please don't feed me and isolate me and then not pay attention when I come up with something.
Councillor King.
Thank you. I'm grateful for the indulgence, Chair. This is your session, but the exchanges kind of do warrant a little rounding off, and I'll try, Mark, to capture the spirit I know that you'd want to respond in. We'll just walk back a bit, and then I'll go back to you, Carl. the spirit of today has to be one where, faced with limited time and a huge challenge, because this is, back to Councillor Willett's point, it's been very, I thought we were clear, and you played it back the right way as I hear it. This is the time, the next few months, when we have to make radical change and very difficult choices. We can't just take the 3 out of 2 and just a little bit off here. It just won't work. It's worked before. It's not the wrong thing to go and do, but this is not the time when that will suffice. We're talking about a quarter of the budget's got to be found in some form or another. I don't want to say too much about that out loud right now. But the process, Carl, has got to be one to be cost effective in terms of time and energy, and frankly to be practical about it, in which we're in the same place. At the very beginning of my earlier remarks, I said what's coming through will build on the transparency as we've got it that we've shared. So when we meet those who can, the members, 6th of December, I think it is, we'll start to see the first fruits of that. I'm talking to Paul Dundas about this. We will share. Can I just finish off the remark? We will share everything we've got with him. We will include you as far as you can be included, is all I can say in the time it's available. I'm going to share what I have today as a good illustration of here it is and see it, but it is, from your perspective, I suspect, imperfect. All I can do is keep to the principal, Chair, which is the smart thing to do is to do whatever needs to be done together as far as we can. Still leaves room for political difference and political commentary. All I can do is make the promise again. I've shown it as best I may have been able to, that we're sincere in ensuring that members feel that they will own as much of the process as they want to and as their instincts and their talents allow them to, and that includes you, absolutely.
I still haven't gotten an answer on access to service heads.
Well, I think the chief exec indicated openly in the meeting earlier that if you are having any difficulty with accessing, to take that up directly, and she will endeavour to ensure that whatever is reasonably practicable, she will ensure takes place for you. Councillor Corey, I'm going to allow you a very brief indulgence, and then I'm going to be brief.
Come to county and be an opposition member. Trust me, you have nothing. This council, and I've been to many others, done peer reviews of a number of different councils. This council, and better than under my leadership, under Councillor King's leadership, is as open as we can be politically. We've been more open. And I just want to say to the officers here and their teams, in most cases, Councillor Sunnox, have answered your questions and take time and do give genuine answers. And really, I want to commend them, because I think if you go to the officers, they will give you the time to work on the alternative budget. The finance team, you can work through the chief executive about the other questions. I just want to say they do spend a lot of time working on answers. And those questions you ask are useful, and we appreciate that. The alumni sessions are more open than I've seen in any other council. Our briefings, we involved other members on the capital work programme that we're going through. The budget briefings are mainly focused on the revenue. And of course, we come here, we report, and we answer as many questions as possible. I want to always answer questions, and please tell me if I have not answered any of your questions before, Councillor Sunnox, because I do endeavour to answer them either personally or through the officers. And the last point I'd say is, we are taking the tough decisions. The transformation programme will be coming through, and you'll see those tough decisions, and Pam has absolutely shown, as the head of paid service, that she's committed to that and trying to do the priorities in the way that we set as leadership. We've made the decision. One of the top discretionary services is the garden waste service. We've made that decision, and we are endeavouring to bring in income rather than cut it completely. But unfortunately, the opposition, you voted against that. So we have made a concrete decision. There is one example. The transformation is going to be a radical solution. And we're also looking at capital as we have involved members, how we reduce our capital spend, where we pause and have a look at projects and we stop projects. We are doing that as well. So we are making those decisions, and there are bigger decisions to come. And we listen, we take that on board, and we are doing it. So I really want to thank the officers again, one for this report, one that it's better and more transparent, and two for the answers they do give and the time upcoming that they will give. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Corey. Right, so this report is for us to note, to comment, to ask questions. I think we've all had the opportunity to do that. It's just coming up to 8 o'clock. It's been quite an exhaustive couple of hours. So I'm going to suggest that we have a 10-minute break at this point. We come back, we've got the work programme to deal with, and then we'll go into closed session. So we'll reconvene at 8:10, everyone, please. Are we all live and ready to go? Right. Welcome back, everyone, to the reconvened Governance and Audit Committee meeting. We finished off with the quarter 2 budget monitoring report. I was just reminded by our Democratic Services Officer during the break that there are some recommendations in paragraph 2, but they're not really decisions to be made. And I don't think there's anything, unless any of you has a look at that and thinks that we need to take a vote, I don't think there's anything there that needs an actual vote. All happy with that? Yeah, thank you. All right, so that moves us on to item 10, which is the work programme. Now, before I actually go to what's on the papers in front of us, Councillor Willits had a word with me prior to the meeting about issues regarding some councillor emails. So I agreed that I would allow him a brief opportunity to indicate some of the issues that there have been with councillor emails and for us to take a decision about whether or not we want to have a look at this as part of our work programme going forward. Over to you, Councillor Willits.
Thank you for your indulgence, Chairman. I had proposed to do it under the Have Your Say session, but the Chairman was much kinder and said I could stay in my seat and do it under the work programme. I believe fundamentally that we need to use the email system to its best advantage, and that requires that the email system must work like clockwork for councillors. When constituents, residents try and get in touch with us, the system must work, the emails must get through to councillors. Now, on the 16th of November, I received a report from our email provider that 17 emails to Dennis Willits at colchester.gov and some 70 to Councillor D. Willits had been quarantined by them for unstated reasons, and they were all forwarded to me as a block. The other item to note is that emails are only quarantined for 21 days, after which we cannot get at those emails anymore. The emails that were quarantined and sent on later on, and just to give you the timescale, the first 2 that were quarantined were from William Sunnox to me on the 24th of October and the 25th of October. Those were delivered to me on the 16th of November, which meant it was just outside the 21 days, so that I couldn't even get them back. And this is totally unacceptable, Chairman. The emails from William Sunnox were about discussions about what we were going to do with the fact that there was bogus information published on the over £500 expenditure. Now, whether that was a coincidence, I don't know, but those emails were quarantined. The score given by the email provider in terms of their unpleasantness was 0. There was no ground whatsoever to quarantine those emails, yet they were quarantined for over 3 weeks before they were delivered to me. Perhaps the most embarrassing one was a lady who was threatening to start libel proceedings against me for what I'd said at a planning committee. Even that one didn't arrive. But they arrived as a huge bulk, and there was nothing I could do with them, really. They were history. I believe there is a serious governance issue here. I don't know how many other councillors had their emails delayed intrusively, or whether it was only Councillor Sunnox and myself, that communication chain, which was initially being stopped, but then the automatic quarantine went on for some long time. I wrote to the leader of the council expressing my extreme concerns about what had happened. He asked that I should receive an answer, and no answer has ever been sent to me, which is why I raise it at the Governance Committee, because I think it is a governance matter that we must have standards, governance standards, which stress that councillors' emails must not be stopped, they must not be delayed, they must not be interfered with, because we must be able to depend on taxpayers, residents being able to communicate with their councillor. I don't know the reason, no one has explained the reason why my emails were withheld and quarantined, but I think it is a matter which a committee should investigate rather than an ad hoc investigation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Willits, and I share your concerns that your emails and perhaps other councillors' emails have been quarantined in that way. I'm not aware that any of mine have, but I will now go away and check, you having raised that this evening. I think what's essential tonight is that our Democratic Services Officer takes that away to see whether or not there are any reasons why or how many councillors may have been affected by something similar, and if it proves to be more than just yourself, then I agree with you that we ought to bring an item back to Governance and Audit to have a look at why, what, and how we ensure that it doesn't recur. Happy with that?
Absolutely, Chairman.
And I think Mr. Weaver just wants to make a comment as well.
Just a very quick comment, if I may. If I can just clarify, obviously, occasionally emails may come in that may have something hostile attached to them. They may have an embedded virus or whatever. And that's not an excuse for what happened in that incident. I don't know the exact details of that incident, but we just have to bear in mind that sometimes the council systems do come under attack, and that councillors' emails can have hidden things in them which could cause damage to the council system. However, I understand exactly what Councillor Willits is saying. I think it is probably appropriate that the committee does look at this, but I'd also like to add to Councillor Willits that my emails had exactly the same. So it was nothing personal to you, Councillor Willits. So I'll just give you that assurance. I had exactly the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weavers. And I think you're quite right to remind us that we're all aware of cyber attacks in this day and age. So yes, we do have to be mindful that from time to time, and I know that happens with my own emails, that they will be held up. But the fact that a significant number of emails have been held up for a lengthy period of time, I think is a bit concerning, and that's something that we need to have a look at. Right, thank you. The work programme then is in front of us. We've got another date planned for 7th of February. So we will be able to squeeze some things in there. I've no doubt that we'll want to look at the Q3 turnout. We'll probably want to come back and look at where we're at with CCHL at that point. We've still got the capital programme review. I think we've now penciled that in for January, haven't we? Yeah. Anything else that Councillor Sunnock?
Yes. Could I suggest that we put the request to look at the centralised property system and the people we've got, and the sort of appraisals we're doing? Could I suggest we put that in with the capital work programme? I think that fits quite neatly. And going forward, it should merge into a oneness there, I'd think. We also, I saw that we've scoped out the budget from this committee, and it's going to be covered somewhere else. And I'd be interested to know where else it's going to be covered. We've talked about CCHL, and I think that will come back, so that's good. The accounting implications of what we're doing with CCHL. And finally, could I make a request that we discuss the status of the accounts and where we got with them at every audit, governance and audit committee, that we have an update on them at every governance and audit committee until we're in line with our statutory obligations.
I'm quite happy to do that, Councillor Sunnox. I know you raised that last week with me and with officers, and I think that makes eminent sense. So I think we could have that as a standing item on the agenda until we've cleared the backlog of auditing our accounts, so that we, at least as a committee, we know where we're at. We have a briefing, even if it's just a 5-minute verbal update on where we're at. I take your point about the capital programme and budget. I think I'll probably have to have a look with Matthew Evans and the officers about whether we shift or move around something from January to February to try and fit everything in, because the meeting that we've got planned for January is a bit busy looking at the agenda at the moment, but we may need to just tweak, move something around to ensure that we bring those in together.
And the budget?
And the budget, I'm not quite sure what you mean by the budget, because so the budget will go to Cabinet and then to full council.
Chair, can I come in? It will go to scrutiny first for pre-scrutiny, then it will go to Cabinet, and then it will go to full council.
Yeah. And that's always been the case. That's never come to G&A.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else to do with the work programme that we want to try and squeeze in between now and the end of the year? Nope, I think we've got enough work. We've certainly earned our corn this year, I would suggest. I know I've been at many a meeting previously of G&A where we've been out of here within an hour, so I think that wasn't a good thing. The fact that we're being much more diligent is a good thing. Right, so can we agree the work programme subject to those amendments? Thank you. Right, that brings us to the close of our public session. I need the announcement. I'm just having a look for it. There we go. Thanks, I found it, Matthew. In accordance with section 100A, subsection 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, I move that we exclude the public, including the press, from the meeting, so that any items containing exempt information, for example, confidential personal, financial or legal advice, in Part B of this agenda can be decided. Agreed?